So I'm a PhD candidate in social anthropology at the University of Kent, and I work on post-conflict population change in Timor-Leste. This means that I'm looking at how people think about rebuilding life after conflict, and particularly their thoughts about what it means to create the next generation, what they think about aspects of reproduction and continuing life and tradition in Timor-Leste after the Indonesian occupation. I came back from fieldwork 1 year ago, and I'm in the process of writing my thesis.
And where you were living exactly in Timor?
So I was in a village in the Central Mountains. Actually, it's more classified as a town, but it's quite small, called Malbisi. And I rented a room in a family's house, and they rented this house to a lot of doctors, nurses, people who worked at the local hospital, which was quite big. So I managed to rent a room that was within the family house, but was also filled with other people who were renting accommodation.
I wanted to have this call with you, talk with you, because every time that I try to explain what fieldwork is, I always, end up talking about the weirdest thing that happened during my field work, but I don't describe the practice itself.
Yeah, it's funny because friends, since I've got back, have asked me, so how was it? What did you do? And it's so difficult to describe because there's not really a solid structure to the field work in a way. It's difficult to sum up the things that you did every day, and it can be so varied that you want to tell these stories of like the really interesting or amazing or fun or terrible things that you saw and that you experienced or shared with people. So to try and summarize it into one thing is really difficult.
It's really difficult, yes, and it's also very difficult to let people understand why are these funny, or why are these things that we say so important for us? Like, why do I tell you that my research is about sex and coffee, or why do I tell you that my research is about, I don't know, that time that I brought a chicken to my family because I thought it was a nice present, and they ended up thinking that I was jealous about their chickens because they thought I wanted their chickens, and so I brought mine from Dili.
Is that the chicken that you won in a quiz?
Yes, that one. Precisely that one. And in a way, fieldwork should be about this, right?
Yeah, there was one of my supervisors gave me that excellent piece of advice during my field work. When I was thinking about how I was going to do field work and what sort of people I was going to try and interview, what sort of events or things was I going to try and did I want to go and see? And, she said, allow yourself to make mistakes because that's when interesting things happen. And it wasn't that, she was advising me to go and just like do everything wrong, but it was that in order to learn some of the more interesting things about local perceptions or about, hierarchical structures, or even bits of history, you kind of have to, stumble upon them or end up there by chance. And so in a way, fieldwork is about being there and letting it happen. And I think in the beginning, I was really I put a lot of pressure on myself because I wanted to, there was so much to understand. There was so much to know. I was still learning the language, and there was a lot of pressure on myself that I put on myself. Whereas, in the end, I just needed to be there and let things happen. There were some really interesting things that occurred just because I happened to be hanging around, like, drinking coffee or I had a motorbike and somebody needed a lift. So in a way that, when people say fieldwork is deep hanging out, it's not to dismiss it as something that is easy or is totally relaxed. It's about being there and being present.
Yeah, and the main one, and another point is that you don't immediately understand what the field work is about. Like during the field work, they ask you to take notes. You have to take notes and you have to write everything down. Like even small things, like I don't know, who wakes up first in the morning.
Yeah,
these silly things. And in that precise moment, while you're writing, you don't realize the reason why you're writing all those things. This is not a formal way of doing, like it's not an experiment with a clear procedure.
Exactly. And I think this kind of methodology is what gave me a lot of stress, particularly in my field research, because I was working at this intersection where, I'm looking at how people understand sex and reproduction, but also how they think about the population as a whole. Timor being a newly independent country with a really rapidly growing population, but has just, come out of what's just often described as a genocide where a lot of lives were lost. So I'm trying to understand in a way how people are thinking about collective life and sort of the numbers around population and how high fertility rates are. How many children are people having? And I felt a lot of pressure to collect that sort of quantitative data, that numerical data. And a lot of people that I talked to as well would always point me towards surveys, the census data, new reports that had a lot of quantitative data in them. And I felt really under pressure in a way that I wasn't doing any of this myself. I wasn't, I wasn't doing a survey. I wasn't doing knowledge, attitudes, and perspective survey. I was hanging out and I was talking to people about their families and family histories and what they wanted for the future. So I felt a lot of pressure to do this more structured study that wasn't ethnographic, and I had sort of this crisis of ethnography of, is any of this going to be useful? All of these stories are just here and I think they're interesting, but is this going to be of use to anyone? So it was really something that I had to struggle against, this thing that I wasn't doing a structured survey where people needed to give me yes or no answers or this kind of thing. So I really had to struggle against that. But it made my research a lot more understanding of the way in which life is being measured and valued and sort of constantly counted, not just by people in Timor who are working towards development economically, but also by people in my field site, the people that lived in Malbisi.
Yeah, because I think that what is most important for us is trying to understand the point of view of the people we work with. And so it's not just an external observation, but you try and understand, the values, the understanding of the people you live with or, you work with. And in order to do so, you have to really experience the same things that the other people do. So if you're if you are with them, of course, you're going to have a deeper understanding of them, and they're also going to open, let's say, more doors to you, because in a way you have to be part of the community. And then the difficult is to try and keep a kind of not an external eye, but, trying to be objective, but at the same time be with them.
Exactly. It's so difficult, and in a way, again, ushers in all sorts of, identity crises. Like, if you are trying to live your life in a place with people in order to do research, to try and understand something, to try and know what people's experiences are like. And, for me, that meant going to funerals or going to weddings, dancing at parties, or, sitting under a blanket with a couple of people watching YouTube videos and drinking tea to keep warm. These kind of experiences helped me understand what life was like. And also I shared a lot with people in Malbisi, and they shared a lot with me. So there was this kind of exchange of kind of, I guess...
It's a kind of reciprocity, don't you think?
Yeah, and we do like that word in anthropology. And a lot of young people also describe it to me like this exchange of information, of knowledge, of like learning from one another, and in a way that really is what it's about. You yourself have to put yourself there and open up to people about your experiences. So it can be quite emotional, emotionally draining and challenging. And all the time that is going on, you're still knowing that you can't stay forever, that you will have to leave, and that you're going to write about this. And I think for me, that was one of the most difficult parts, was having these close relationships with people that I knew that these friendships would hopefully last, but at some point I was going to have to leave, and trying to maintain some sort of like part of myself that I didn't give everything to the field because otherwise it's all consuming and it takes over everything.
For me, the saddest thing is that after almost 2 years after I went back to Timor, I haven't been able to give back anything to the family, to the families that hosted me, to the community that hosted me. And even if, I don't know, I would probably get the thesis translated or maybe some parts of it, but in any case, I won't be able to actually give back and give a real restitution of what they gave me.
Yeah, it's incredibly... this is also something in the field that kind of troubled me a lot of, what do people want from this, from what I'm doing, and what use is it going to have in the end? Because you're constantly asking yourself that question of, and I think especially in Timor, where there's just so much development work going on, people are always constantly asking the question, how is this going to help Timor? And I was actually asked that question on my first visit to Timor in 2016, and it put me on the spot because I hadn't presumed that anything that I was going to do would be helpful, because it just hadn't, it wasn't something that I assumed that my research would do. And not because I didn't want to, but because it was, a challenge to think about what that would be. I think one of the best things that I did before I left, I had to give all of these presentations before I left because I was presenting to the Ministry of Health and at a local conference as well, the Timor-Leste Studies Association, where you've also presented. Mm-hmm. But one of the best